Today we're talking to Christie Buttars Giles, a candidate for District 10 Senate seat. Over the next 10 minutes or so, we'll cover the questions that have come up during her conversations with delegates over the past 2 weeks. So Christie, let's jump right in and start out with, why are you running?
Well, as most of you know, my father is former Senator Chris Buttars, and because of that connection, some detractors have been asserting that I'm riding on his coattails in this election, and I just want to address that right up front. My dad never asked me to run for the Senate. This is something I knew that I needed to do, and it was completely my decision. And what's interesting is if you think about it, riding on my dad's coattails would never be a smooth experience. I knew coming into this race that there would be positive and negative connotations associated with my dad, and that those would be transferred in some way to me. And so I decided to face that connection head on and own it. And so I'm running as Christie Buttars Giles. Now, will that help me or hurt me? I don't know for sure, either way at this point. But what I do know is that I'm really proud of the strong, courageous leadership and unwavering dedication to principle that my dad demonstrated during his 10 years representing Senate District 10. And that's the kind of legislator I'm going to be.
One of the concerns that some have expressed is the way that your dad expressed himself at times. What do you have to say to that?
Well, I graduated in journalism from BYU in 1992. And I never worked in journalism. I went straight into corporate communication, and I've worked there most of my career. But I do think that background in communication, in journalism, I should say, is important because I absolutely understand the power of a soundbite and the danger of a soundbite and the importance of choosing your words correctly. Also, when I was his aide a couple years ago, my dad's aide a couple of years ago, I was able to set some real concrete boundaries for the media, and I think that'll serve me well going forward.
The theme of your campaign has been keeping it close to home. Explain that to us.
Well, when anyone goes into politics, I think they do it because they want to have a voice. And so the most important thing a senator for District 10 can do is make sure that that voice is amplified and heard. To do that, we're going to have to change some of the ways we do things up at the legislature. For example, end of session or mid-session reports are just too little too late. By the time you get those, much of the action is over, and there's very little we can do to influence it. So that's a problem. Another thing that we encounter up there is that legislators get hundreds of emails every single day of the legislative session. And it's almost impossible to determine where they come from. Some are coming from outside the country, some are coming from outside the state, some are just coming from across the valley. But what they do in the end is dilute the voice of Southwest Valley residents because legislators count every one of those emails equally and give them equal weight. And that becomes a problem for us in having our unique viewpoints and issues represented. I've been thinking a lot about this since I was an aide for my dad in the Senate. And I think the best approach to this is to have weekly conference calls. I've looked into it, and we can do this. Here's how it would work. Once a week, you could call in. You're at home with your kids, you're at lunch break, you're on lunch break at work, and you dial in for an hour, and in real time, we have discussions about what's happening at the legislature that week. We can make plans, we can evaluate other legislators' bills, and we can determine priorities together. When you listen as a legislator, you're representing values that are close to home. For example, I've been going to cottage meetings and meet the candidate nights and having phone conversations and in-person visits with many of you this past couple of weeks. And I'm hearing a lot about education. That shouldn't surprise any of you. It doesn't surprise me. I have kids in secondary and elementary school right now, and I'm worried about funding for education. And so I am absolutely committed to finding new revenue sources for public and charter schools one of my highest priorities. Another thing I hear is that public schools and charter schools need to have the autonomy to choose how their funds are spent at the local school level. Not every school needs the same thing. Some schools, some years are going to need computers and others are going to need books. And we need to allow schools the option to determine what their needs are and fill them using the funds that they're provided. Another thing that's really close to home for me when we talk about keeping things close to home is the Republican Party platform. I'm sure it is for you too. A delegate was telling me a story just the other day that illustrates this perfectly. She'd been feeling for a while that the direction the country was going and a little bit of this, how the state of Utah was going, wasn't fitting in to how she felt things should go. She didn't feel that the direction aligned with her values. And then she went to the Republican Party convention the other day. And as they read the Republican Party platform, people were standing and cheering for different lines, and she was inspired. I'm inspired by the Republican Party platform. I believe in marriage between a man and a woman. I believe in defending the rights of unborn children and upholding the rule of law and small government. And so when you see me up at the legislative session and I'm following this platform, I want you to feel inspired, and I want you to feel that I am representing our home, the southwest side of the valley.
What are some of the other issues that the delegates are talking about?
Oh, immigration comes up constantly, and for good reason. It touches everything in our state and our nation. You can talk about it, how it impacts, transportation. You can talk about how it impacts law enforcement and schools and emergency rooms and property values, and the list goes on and on. It's something everyone's really worried about.
What would you do to address illegal immigration?
Well, one thing's clear, we haven't found the answer yet. If we want to be fair, amnesty just isn't the answer, and neither is HB 116, the guest worker program. It's essentially an amnesty bill, and the problem is that it circumvents the rule of law, and not only that, it actually creates a new rule of law for one small part of our population, and that's probably somewhere we don't want to go. What I really like is the bill that we worked on a couple of years ago, SB 251, the E-Verify bill. And what it does is it requires Utah businesses to verify legal employment eligibility before they hire. I worked on that bill with Senator Buttars 2 years ago when I was his aide, and the problem with the way it passed was we had to take out the penalties. There were a lot of concerns expressed by the business community, and so that bill passed without penalties. And I would really like to have a discussion with the Senate 10 constituents about putting the penalties back into that bill and making sure that Utah employers are hiring a legal workforce.
We have one candidate whose focus has really been on the federal intrusion into the states. Where do you come down on that issue?
You know, there are a lot of legislators in the House and in the Senate who are working on this issue right now. And because of that, because there's so many people working on it, it is bound to go forward, and I support their efforts in balancing state and federal powers and jurisdictions.
Okay, so let's talk about transparency. The legislature voted to repeal HB 477, the modifications to the Grandma Bill. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that was the only thing they could do, is to repeal it. I'm really proud of my dad on this issue. He was the only one who stood and spoke against the bill and voted against it. No other Republican did that. Now that it's repealed, that's just the beginning. We're going to hear a lot more about it going forward. And I have to tell you, I lean very, very far to the side of transparency. I feel like any electronic communications that are transmitted via government system or a government device need to be open to the public. And I even lean towards a lot of private records being open to the public. A lot of times we're hearing that this is going to cost us way too much, that open access costs too much. I just don't feel that way. We've been paying for open access for a long, long time. And while we can surely go in and revisit the fee structure and adjust it as we need to, I think most of us consider the fees that we pay for open access to be the price of liberty, and we're glad to pay them.
Okay, we're running out of time. Let's do some rapid fire here. A couple of the candidates are pushing a constitutional convention where the states gather to update the Constitution. Tell us what you think of that.
Hey, we can't go with a constitutional convention. the Constitution is inspired and inspiring. And once we start trying to amend it or change it just to fit our present day circumstances, we start down a slippery slope. Here's the problem. You might start out with great intentions, and we probably would, to just amend one article. But once you're there, it's very easy to suspend the rules and begin to change other articles and to make other deviations from the original document. Another problem is, although the states actually call the convention, Congress determines how it proceeds. And if it becomes something along the lines of an electoral college, where states with a higher population get more votes, Utah could very quickly find our conservative voice being drowned out. So this is not a good idea. Instead of changing the Constitution, we need to adhere to it.
Will you support raising taxes?
No, I won't raise taxes that impact families or individuals.
Under what conditions would you tap into the Utah's Rainy Day Fund?
Oh, heaven forbid something happens in Utah like happened in Japan. That's an appropriate time to use the Rainy Day Fund. Or if we need to build some sort of emergency infrastructure, maybe to bring in food, a road to bring in food. Those are the type of situations where you need a rainy day fund. But we've got to let it grow so it's there when we need it. It's absolutely not appropriate to use our rainy day fund or one-time money to balance the budget every year.
Let's end on this. Christie, tell the delegates why they should vote for you.
Oh, this is undoubtedly the worst question in politics, because whatever we say at this point comes off as sounding trite. But I do believe this. When you vote for someone to represent you, the issues are important, but not as important as the person, because issues change. Next year, what we're dealing with will be different than what we're dealing with this year in some way. But the person and the way they react to issues and their perspective and their core foundational principles are going to be the same. Now, when you vote for me, you will know what you're getting all the time. I will be honest about what I'm thinking. You'll never have to guess where I'm going with something. I will stand on principle. I'll be collaborative. And when we've reached a decision, I'll move forward with confidence and with focus. I want, at the end of the time that I spend in the Senate, to be able to say that I've never voted to or acted to benefit myself personally or to get reelected. And most of all, I want you to always feel, when you're watching what's going on up at the Senate, that I am representing our home, the Southwest Valley, with integrity. Thanks for listening.